So now having the offer curve introduced, we can discuss the problem of optimal tariff within general equilibrium framework. Okay, but there is one more tool that we need to have to complement what we're gonna have within with the tariff, the offer curve. Okay, and that curve is called international trade utility curve, or international trade indifference curve, right? Because this is going to be indifference curve like the ones we were using before. So now let me just, again, this is something that either mathematically or even graphically, in this case, would be extremely hard to explain. I would definitely not be able to draw it on the blackboard. There is graphical description in your book, but I believe that what I'm going to say about this to you now is going to be suffice to understand the concept. Look, let's just say that we are interested in what is happening to Austria. We know that Austria is exporting manufacturers and importing food, right? Okay, so now, look, if we are exporting some goods, it means we have less of them to consume. If we are importing goods, it means we have more of them for consumption. So, in this case, we can think about export as a bad good and imports as a good good. Look, actually, in your intermediate microeconomics, you've probably seen something like that. This is the indifference curve for a special case where we have bad and good. So good that we want and good that we don't want. Okay, but in this case, this in our indifference, international trade indifference curve should also contain all the information about the entire general equilibrium. And of course, it would be really hard to derive. So let's just use some of our intuition and the knowledge we've already accumulated to derive it. Look, if you have one good that you don't want and one good that you want, because those are the goods we are getting, those are the goods we are giving in exchange for those. So look, there is a compensation effect. Look, in order to obtain the same amount of utility, there's need to be some compensation. So to accept one thing we don't want, we need to have more of the thing we want, right? So look, the more we have of something we don't want, to maintain the same total utility, we should have more of the thing we want. And look, this actually causes this indifference curve to look like that. Because look, here we see that with the each additional unit of exports to be accepted, we need to have more inputs. Okay, so now that we've established the relationship, the question is, in which direction should we go to be on the indifference curve that we consider to be a better one? So let's call it U trade 1. So, in this case, I think it's obvious. Like, look, because this is the good we want, this is the good we don't want, because look, those are the goods we are giving away, those are the goods we are receiving, right? So, the closer we are to the, I want them to be as parallel as possible. The closer we are to the axis where we have more imports, of course, those indifference curves are going to be associated with the higher utility from trade. Okay, but now the question is, how do we achieve it? Because look, of course, now we know that we want to have as much imports in exchange for as little exports as possible. How is that possible? Look, the thing is that this depends on terms of trade. Remember when I was telling you about the corner solutions when we were deriving the offer curve? Well, I told you that when we reach maximum capacity, we cannot produce, for example, more manufacturers. But still, if the price of manufacturers relative to price of food is increasing, we can exchange the same amount of manufacturers for bigger amount of food. But look, this is actually true not only for this corner solution, but it's true everywhere. Look, because if you are exporting manufacturers, then the better you are, the higher is the value of it. Because look, let's just say that at the beginning is 1. What does it mean? We can exchange 1 unit of manufacturers for 1 unit of food on international markets. So, this is telling us that if we are producing manufacturers, we can sell each unit on international market and get 1 unit of food in return. But what would happen if this ratio would increase to 2? Look, now you see that you can take 1 unit of manufacturers, 1 unit of manufacturers, and exchange it for 2 units of food, right? Look, we can clearly see that if I would multiply both sides by PF, we could see that price of manufacturers, so the value of manufacturers, is equal to 2 units of value of food. And look, as this ratio increases to 4, to 5, to 15, we see that the position of the exporter of manufacturers is getting better. Why? Well, because with the same amount of production, he can get more of food in exchange on the international market. So look, in our context, the price ratio that you see over here is terms of trade. Look, because if we are the exporter of manufacturers, then the terms of trade are telling us the ratio at which we exchange the goods between the 2 nations. And the higher is the value of that, the more we can get for 1 unit of our manufacturers. So I hope you can see right now that if terms of trade are improving, then we should expect to get on the better and better and better indifference curve. Why? Well, look, because here is some ratio of exchange between the two hidden within this curve. But now, if this is changing, we see that number of units of imports that we're going to get for 1 unit of exports is bigger. Look, we can see this over here. Let's just say that this is 1 unit of manufacturers, and here you have 1 unit of food. Here you have 2 units of food. Here you see that you can have 3 units of food. So look, at the first indifference curve, I can exchange 1 unit of manufacturers that I'm exporting for 1 unit of food. But here, for 2 and for 3. So the better are the terms of trade, the higher is the indifference curve at which we can be. Okay, and this is the last tool that we needed in order to analyze the impact of tariffs in general equilibrium model. Okay, so let's start as we started before. So we draw the offer curve. So here we will have either exports of manufacturers of Austria or imports of manufacturers of Bolivia. And here we will have imports of food of Austria and imports and exports of food Bolivia. Okay, and again, let's draw now 2 offer curves. Offer Austria, and the second one for Bolivia. Okay, and this is offer for Bolivia. Okay. Now, we know that this point is giving us international trade equilibrium. Now, imagine, let's just say, rather very, how to say, unrealistic situation that government of Austria is extremely small. What do I mean by that? Government of Austria knows everything about production structure of its economy. It knows everything, of course, about capital, labor, capital intensity parameter, and by that also labor intensity parameter. It knows everything. It knows everything about tastes of the customers. So know the parameters of knows the parameters of utility function, right? And this is not enough. Let's just say that this government of Austria knows exactly the same things about Bolivia. Knows everything about their production technology, intensity, production structure, number of capital, number of labor employed. So generally, the entire knows everything about labor, capital, tastes, everything. Look, knowing this and having this incredible knowledge, actually turns out that government of Austria could do a very unpleasant trick for Bolivia. It could introduce a tariff, a specific tariff that would move and that would change the terms of trade at which those two countries are actually trading it. And look, it makes perfect sense that, look, if I'm introducing a tariff on manufacturers, this time, I'm sorry, if I would be introducing a tariff on food, right? So because Austria imports food, then I have 1 plus t. So the ratio of the two will change. But look, this is not everything, right? Because there is a second effect. Look, in our example, we just have two countries, Austria and Bolivia. So look, so demand from these two countries must necessarily influence price on the world market. If we have just two big players, then of course each of their decision affects one another. Where have we heard something like that? Definitely we discussed this in this class when we were discussing tariff choice by where we discussed tariff choice by a large country, but maybe somewhere in other class. Maybe something about oligopoly, right? In microeconomics, we had two big companies, we have duopoly. What one company does affects what the other company do, right? Affects the well-being of this other company. But maybe something more current. You have class with Jana about a game theory. This is basically a game theoretic problem. When a move of one player is influencing the situation of the other player. And actually, the entire reasoning that with which we're gonna end here is something that you're gonna see as purely game theoretical. So look, now if we are introducing tariff on food, right? It's like saying we are willing to purchase less food. And look, this means that there is a drop in demand for food. When there is a drop in demand for food, price of food is going down. And when price of food is going down, it means that the terms of trade are changing in favor of manufacturers. Now, with lower price of food, we can exchange the same amount of manufacturers for more food, right? So definitely, this could be a possible way to gain some advantage for Austria over Bolivia. Now, how would we see this on a graph? Look, in this case, we can say that this offer curve is offer curve without tariff. Now, after the introduction of a tariff, what will happen? Look, the thing is that our offer curve will change and it will start rotating and it's gonna end up in a position like this. And this will be offer curve A with tariff. so look, through introduction of a tariff, Austria was able to manipulate international demand, and as a result, price of food has changed and it got lower. So now Austria can exchange the same amount of manufacturers for more food. But look, actually, where we end up over here is something that is also was predicted before in both in general equilibrium framework, because look, we see that actually both countries are trading less, right? For two reasons. Well, first there is a tariff on food, which creates lower demand on food. Food is more expensive for people in Austria, so they buy less of it. And because the terms of trade has changed, now food can be exchanged for less. It can be exchanged for less manufacturers, right? So both countries are limiting their trade. But look what has happened over here. Actually, we see that now that level of imports of food decreased by some amount, but this amount is clearly smaller than the amount of manufacturers over here. So now Austria is receiving less food, but is sending far less manufacturers. So in total, those manufacturers stay in the country, and now they can enjoy them in the country, right? And can achieve higher utility. But can we be sure that they are achieving higher utility? Well, to that end, we need to add trade indifference curves. But I think even without them, just knowing their structure and logic behind them, you can see that this must be true. Because look, if I'm going to draw indifference curve, trade indifference curve over here, I will clearly see that indifference curve that is going through this point must be lying higher, and clearly UTR, let's call it UA simply, 0 is worse than A1, right? We clearly see that this indifference curve is represents higher utility. Okay, so look, what have we learned from this entire example? If we would have a situation in which we have two big players, like in our model, then if one of the players would possess extremely detailed knowledge about its own economy and about the competitor or the partner economy, this knowledge can be used in such a way that by introduction of a tariff, they could change terms of trade, and those terms of trade would produce an outcome that is definitely better than the one we had before. Okay, so now you can question whether this possession of such knowledge in case of the Austrian economy is a sensible assumption. Well, of course not. Well, look, if you observe any legislative process in any country, you see that a lot of these decisions are, I'm going to use here an oxymoron, are governed by chaos Yeah, very often the parliamentary members are just realizing some particular interest of some groups, and definitely nobody possesses the knowledge so let's just say perfect information that could be used to find such an optimal tariff. But you could say that maybe in some cases we could just get close to this situation, and of course this is a reasonable assumption. So again, is this a good argument for tariff? Well, definitely not, because like in order to get such an amazing result, we would have to have knowledge that is beyond the capabilities of any human being, or probably even a computer at this moment. But look, this is not how the game is usually played in the economics. Let's assume that it is possible, right? And probably this is how you play the game in the game theory, right? So, if this is possible for Austria, why would we expect it is impossible for Bolivia? If Austrian politicians are smart enough to get best economics, best data analysis, to get all this specific data, to get this perfect optimal tariff, then why cannot do this government authorities in Bolivia? And of course they can. So now let's analyze this situation. If we have either case of retaliation, or maybe something more adequate, let's just say that we have a game in which both players are taking their decision at the same time. Okay, let's see where we're gonna end up. Okay, so here we have imports of food by Austria and exports of food by Bolivia. Here we have again exports of manufactures by Austria and imports of manufactures by Bolivia. Okay. Oh, you know, let me just add one more thing over here. If we would draw the lines, through these points, we could actually see the change of trade in terms of trade that I've been telling you about. But of course, look, those graphs are messy enough, so I'm not going to introduce these changes in terms of trade. Just remember the mechanism that led to this solution. Okay, but now let's go back to this case. Okay, so first, let's draw the offer curve for Austria. Offer for Austria, no tariff. Then we draw an offer curve for Bolivia. And of course, over here, at this point, we're going to have trade equilibrium. Now, so we already said that Austria could perform these very complicated calculations, find the optimal tariff, and as a result, the offer curve would rotate, and we would end up at this point. Here we have with tariff. Okay, let's call this point E A, because that would be the optimal choice from the perspective of Austria. But look, if Bolivian government, now we know, can perform exactly the same thing, why wouldn't it do it? So now offer curve of Bolivia would rotate, this one would rotate clockwise, and we would have okay, good enough. It shouldn't be falling here that much, but okay. I'm sorry, as I told you, I'm not a robot, but I hope you will see where I'm going with this. And look, this point would turn out to be best option to get by Bolivia, right? Here we would have offer B with optimal tariff, right? Now look, the thing is, what if both countries are going to do the same thing at the same time and introduce a tariff? Well, we're gonna end up at this point. And what is this point characterized by? Look, it's characterized by very little trade in comparison to the initial situation, but it's also characterized by relatively little trade in comparison with each of these situations. But look, in this case we see that terms of trade stay relatively the same, but there is way far less trade. So, are the countries better? Well, let's see. Look, if I'm going to draw the first indifference curve for the initial point, it's going to look like this. If I'm going to draw a difference curve for, of course, point chosen by Austrian government, it's going to look like this. But now, if I'm going to draw a difference curve for the point where we actually ended up when both countries decided to introduce tariffs, we see that this indifference curve is definitely the worst one for Austria. And look, I don't want to make this graph even more messy, but look, if we would do the same map of indifference curves for Bolivia, they would be going like this, right? Because we would have them in opposite direction. We would see that actually this is the worst position for both of these countries. So look, actually, if we have a situation in which both countries would come to the conclusion that it's best to introduce the optimal tariff, the welfare in both countries is going to decrease, positive effect of introducing optimal tariff through impact on terms of trade would diminish, and at the same time, distorting effect of a tariff would diminish trade that was before beneficial to both countries. And look, the thing is that this example actually brings another great argument for free trade. And this argument is associated with retaliation. And look, sometimes retaliation in terms of maybe one more thing. Look, over here, if this would be discussed as some type of prisoner dilemma within game theory, well, the rational players should stay here, right? Here, it should actually, should not stay here. They should end up over here. Why? Well, look, because in this case scenario, this is of course the best option, but if each of the players is afraid of that the other player might choose a better option, of course the optimal strategy is to introduce a tariff, and they both end up in worse situation, right? The typical prisoner dilemma. Look, this game is played many times, right? Because now, if in the real world we have more of a situation in which if one country is introducing a tariff, the other country is also introducing a tariff on this country product, sometimes just in spite, and sometimes just to punish the other country. And the punishment is more important. Look, this is exactly what happened after Donald Trump introduced tariffs for European Union goods. Like what European Union countries did in return, they introduced tariffs not because they wanted to, but because they wanted Americans to know that if you're gonna play this game, we can also play this game, and we don't want you to actually introduce more tariffs, and you need to know that if you do introduce tariffs, we introduce even more. But Chinese actually were even better at this, because what Chinese did, they were actually, when US was introducing tariffs on China, they figured out we're also going to introduce tariffs on American goods, but we're going to introduce tariffs on the goods that are produced in the places where support for Donald Trump was the highest, which was a very smart strategy. Of course, it didn't work in the sense that Donald Trump simply took the money collected from tariffs and simply collected from taxes and gave them back to people, redistributed, before he said that they can take it. But look, this is a net loss for this country. When you introduce a tariff, you get retaliation, and you use the money from tariffs and some other money to compensate. Is just a net loss. Look, so actually, from this example, we get another impressive proof, not proof, but evidence that free trade is the best option. But okay, knowing all this, let's get back for a second to our prisoner's dilemma. So, if we know that we are in a free trade situation, then optimal choice for Austria is EA, optimal choice for Bolivia is EB, then of course they know that what is optimal for their partners, they would do it, so they would both increase the tariff and they would both end up in a worse scenario. So, in this case, what would be the best idea on what to do? Well, the best idea would be introduce something like a World Trade Organization, some special agreement that would guarantee that none of these countries would actually take advantage of this free trade scenario. Okay, thank you.